I just read the last fifth of Fire and Blood, and it was awesome. And now I'm going to talk about it, because that's what we do here. So, I didn't want to read the whole thing through, because I've already read most of the beginning, most of the middle. I just hadn't read the end. With Aegon III, and, well, all of that stuff. And the Regency. Wow. So I read from the Aftermath, The Hour of the Wolf, all the way to the end. That's where I started. And I figured I'd just go through it page by page, sort of skim reading, and just sort of like reviewing what I just read. Maybe it'll help me compartmentalize this thing. Because after I read it, I felt like, okay, there's so much in there that I need to think about, but I don't know how to begin because there's too much. Here's the short version of my thoughts on the end of Fire and Blood. Viserys did it, Aegon III's brother. He's the evil mastermind at the center of all of this. Mark my words. It is crazy, though. Like, as I was reading it, maybe as you were reading it, did you feel like Viserys and Lady of Lice were strangely quiet throughout the whole thing? They're not absent. They're pretty much always there, but you never really get to see them talk hardly, and they don't really have an opinion or a personality that you get to see. It's almost like it's hidden from you. I think that's on purpose. Well, I guess on the part of George R. R. Martin, but maybe more to the point on the part of the end story author, Maester Gildane, because he's a historian. So, unlike George R. R. Martin, Gildane would have to worry about what he writes down in this book and publishes in a monarchy. Alright, so Aftermath, The Hour of the Wolf. This is the Civil War known as the Dance of the Dragons has just ended, and Aegon III is pretty much the last one left. It starts out, the small folk of the Seven Kingdoms speak of a King Aegon III Targaryen as Aegon the Unlucky, Aegon the Unhappy, and most often the Dragonbane, when they remember him at all. All these names are apt. So yeah, Aegon III is this really depressed, melancholy dude who apparently doesn't like anything in life. Aegon is like the most interesting character in this by far, because he's such a mystery. He's so quiet, and like I get that he's traumatized and all that, and I don't get him on like a psychological level, but not entirely. There are times where he gets emotional or he speaks up. It's weird because most of the time he just kind of like lowers his head and goes and hides in his room or whatever whenever there's some horrible stuff going on. So one thing I can be pretty sure about is that he's disassociated. He's got some sort of disassociation trauma response or something. Let's see what happened to him during the war. To the many things that happened to him. He just wears all black all the time. He's not mean or anything. He's just totally checked out. He's like, alright, fine. If everybody's going to be corrupt and evil, and I don't get a say in anything, then I'm just going to like ignore everyone and stay in my rooms, and then come out and do whatever's required of me, and nothing more. And I'm just going to be a gray rock. You just poke me. It's not going to work. They'll never get a reaction out of me. And it doesn't work, of course. Like, you can't really do that. I mean, try it for a week. Just be like, I'm not going to react or get emotional about anything. I'm just going to walk through like a zombie. And it doesn't work. Eventually, you're going to like slide into your normal habits of being emotional. You're going to see something that gets under your skin or makes you happy, and you can't control your reaction to it. I guess it's the sort of thing you can practice and learn to do, but yeah, then you're just suppressing all your emotions. You don't want to do that for too long. You'll forget who you are. During the war, Aegon and his brother Viserys were separated in the Battle of the Gullet, and Aegon flew away on his dragon, but Viserys had no way of getting away, so he got captured, and then he was presumed dead. And then 4 years later, he came back. And Aegon felt guilty about abandoning his little brother. They're 2 years apart. Aegon's 2 years older than Viserys. Aegon also saw his mother be burned and eaten alive by her dragon. Or no, someone's dragon. Not her dragon. But I haven't read that part in a while, so I don't remember the details. The Hour of the Wolf. So this is the chapter when Stark comes down. Cregan Stark comes down from Winterfell to do some northern justice for like a day or something. And I think he's obviously a parallel of Ned. He's the Winterfell Lord. He comes down to King's Landing to ostensibly clean the place up politically. And really, to me, he seems like a parody of Ned Stark. Well, no, he seems like a parody of the audience's common opinions about Ned Stark. Because the common opinions about Ned Stark are that he was like politically stupid and naive and too idealistic, too obsessed with honor. And Cregan Stark seems to me like he fits that description better than Ned does. I think Ned was actually doing things right. The corruption in the castle was just too far gone. It was beyond saving. But Cregan's justice seems really stupid to me. His justice is the kind of justice that ignores context. It's like a very legalistic kind of justice. That's what I didn't like about it. He's chopping off limbs and heads for crimes, but he's doing it with little or no consideration for the context, the political context of the situation. That this was a civil war, and that the castle came under the control of different sides very quickly, and people didn't have a chance to like change sides and were stuck there and had no choice but to switch sides and shit. Cregan's approach to the whole thing is like, yeah, I don't care. Did you steal anything? Cut off his hand. Did you murder someone? Cut off his head. Did you lie to your ruler? Cut off his tongue. Just that sort of stuff. There's no consideration for like, sometimes you have to do a lesser evil in order to prevent a greater evil, sort of thing. Like Cregan Stark seems like the embodiment of that quote from Varys, where he says, he's talking about Stannis, and he says, "There's nothing half so terrifying on earth as a truly just man." A man without mercy. I don't think Cregan's as bad as Stannis in that. Stannis is definitely the poster child for that sort of stupidity, but Cregan ain't much better. Cregan totally punks the lads. Benjicott and the other teenage boys. They're these like battle-hardened teenagers. They make this super cool entrance. And then Cregan comes in and he's so much more of a man than they are that they just kind of step aside. They're like, yeah, no, I'm not messing with that dude. He's scary. Lady Sam's husband dies and she marries his son, Lionel. He's super hot for her. And the Septon is outraged. After Cregan has his trials, there's a big group of men that are slated to be executed. And he's about to do it himself. And then one of them says, I'll take the black. I take the black. Then all the rest of them hear it and start saying the same thing. And so they all get sent to the wall. Except for two of them, I think. Sir Perkin declared that he wished to take the black. A southern lord might or might not have honored the request, but the Starks are of the north, where the needs of the Night's Watch are held in high regard. And when Lord Cregan bade his men haul the flea onto his feet, the other prisoners saw the road to deliverance and echoed his request. All of them began to shout at once, Mushroom says, like a chorus of drunks bellowing out the words of a song they half remember. I love Mushroom. Mushroom might be the most cited historian in this whole book. I mean, certainly in this last part of it. It's kind of interesting that Maester Gildain, he's constantly discrediting Mushroom, or kind of insulting him a little bit, like, yeah, he's just a filthy pervert. You can't really take anything he says at face value. But there's nobody he references more than Mushroom, it seems like. And by the end of it, he almost seems downright enamored with the dwarf. The Hooded Man. Yeah, poor Tyland Lannister. Rhaenyra's people tortured him. They gouged out his eyes and cut off his tongue. They cut off his ears, that's what it was. It made him so ugly that he just put on a hood. And he served her son faithfully. He was Aegon's best hand. Recalio Rindoon is by far the craziest character in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not even close. That title normally goes to Euron Greyjoy, but I think Recalio just stole it from him, as far as I'm concerned. Like, Euron's totally nuts, but he's nuts in the same way every time. He's an eccentric, narcissistic psychopath. But Recalio Rindoon has like 100 personalities or something. He's a different person from day to day and moment to moment. You never know what you're going to get with that dude, and it's terrifying. And then there was the first queen. Jaehaera is what it was. Little Jaehaera. Oh, Alicent. Poor Alicent, man. They just lock her up in Maegor's Holdfast and she goes crazy. Because all of her kids died. She's got no one. That was easily the darkest moment in this whole book. Alicent's final days. That was the red wedding of Fire and Blood to me. That's the part that made me want to throw the book. But I set it down. And I said, what the fuck, George R. R. Martin? Why did you do this to Alicent? She was the good one, man. Here it is. One death may have been a mercy. The Dowager Queen Alicent of House Hightower, second wife of King Viserys I and mother to his sons, Aegon, Aemond, and Daeron, and his daughter Helena, died on the same night as Lord Westerling, after confessing her sins to the Septa. She had outlived all of her children, and spent the last year of her life confined to her apartments, with no company but her Septa, the serving girls who brought her food, and the guards outside her doors. Books were given her, and needles and thread, but her guards said Alicent spent more time weeping than reading or sewing. One day she ripped all her clothing into pieces. By the end of the year she had taken to talking to herself, and had come to have a deep aversion to the color green. The bad guys won. Totally crushing. She was the good woman in that war. Rhaenyra was the bad one. You're wrong. The man inherits before the woman. That's the law. The Winter Fever. Hey, that's a way to kill a whole bunch of characters really fast. If you ever have too many characters and you need to kill a bunch, just have a plague go through. Wipe them out. In 4 days I will be dead, and I would not die without ever knowing love. The ploy proved so successful that he returned to it with 6 other girls. But when he failed to die, they began to talk, and his scheme unraveled. Oldest trick in the book, my man. Mushroom attributes his own survival to drink. If I drank sufficient wine, I reasoned I might never know I was sick. And every fool knows that the things you do not know will never hurt you. Mushroom's low-key the smartest dude here, man. It's not easy to be funny. You have to be smart to be funny. Well, I guess you don't have to be. There's different kinds of funny. But if you're going to be clever funny, you got to be smart. And Mushroom's clever funny. War and Peace and Cattle Shows. Yeah, the cattle show. That's when Jaehaera comes, right? No, that's Daenerys. Jaehaera supposedly threw herself onto the spikes in the moat. I don't think it was suicide. Someone definitely killed her. I'm not saying 6-year-olds don't commit suicide, but they almost don't. It's way more likely that someone killed her. Maybe it was Peak. I don't know. We're given a few possibilities for who it was. Peak does seem like the most likely answer, but I'm not going to stake my flag in any of them right now. I would have to reread this at least one more time before I even take a crack at it. Alan Valerian's a total badass, too. I don't know if he's totally on the up and up in this whole thing, but he seems like he probably is. That's my first guess. He's actually one of the genuinely good ones. Mostly because he's a man of action. Like, I don't see a lot of plotting or conniving with that guy. He's very much like, hey, I'm going to go do the heroic thing that needs to be done. And I'm going to do it well. And I'm going to win. I'm going to come back and I'm going to share the spoils. That's about as heroic as it gets. Do you think he had sex with the Martell princess? I'm conflicted. I think he didn't, but maybe I'm being naive. It's funny at the end, when he comes back home after his voyage, him and his wife, Bela, I think, get into a fight because he can't stop talking about Aleandra Martell. She's like, I'm sick of hearing about Aleandra. And then they make up, I guess, before he leaves. And Bela gets pregnant. So I guess it was a good makeup. Aleandra, clearly an echo of Arianne. She's like this flirty Martell princess. Mapping the historians is the key to solving all the mysteries in this part of the story. Probably the whole book. Septon Eustace departed King's Landing for Stony Sept, the town of his birth, where he devoted himself to the writing of his great, if somewhat turgid, work. The reign of King Viserys, first of his name, and the dance of the dragons that came after. Sadly, Septon Bernard preferred composing sacred music to setting down court gossip, and his writings are therefore of little interest to historians and scholars, and of less interest to those who find pleasure in sacred music, it grieves us to say. So, because there's a change of Septons, and the new Septon did not prioritize writing history, there's probably a gap in the histories there for some reason. And so I think the challenge there is to bridge the gap. Maybe there's something that happened that did not get recorded roundabouts these parts, because Septon Bernard was there playing music instead of writing history. Gaiman Palehair. So he's Aegon III's whipping boy. At this point in the story, he is his cupbearer and food taster. And, yeah, they're friends. And then the Master-at-Arms, who's pretty cruel, realizes that Aegon is friends with him. And that even though he can't hit Aegon, he can hit Gaiman Palehair. So they turn Gaiman Palehair into Aegon's whipping boy. When he wants to punish Aegon, or improve Aegon's performance, they just whip the Gaiman Palehair. Whip his friend. That's evil and twisted. But apparently that's normal in the royal family. There are plenty of other whipping boy situations in this story. I think Joffrey has one, Tommen has one, and there's some other ones too. And then the Hand executes a whole bunch of people, and Aegon just has to watch. It says, King Aegon III stood atop the gatehouse battlements throughout the feast of our Father above, and never spoke nor looked away from the bloodletting below. The king had as well been made of wax, observed Septon Eustace. Grand Maester Munkin echoes him. His grace was present, as was his duty, yet somehow he seemed far away as well. There's the disassociation. Some of the condemned turned to the battlements to shout out cries for mercy, but the king never seemed to see them, nor hear their desperate words. Make no mistake. This feast was served to us by the Hand, and 'twas he who gorged upon it. Aegon and Jaehaera, his wife, are both really broken kids. They don't dislike each other, but they don't like each other either. They just kind of stay apart, it seems like. But they're kids. I think Aegon is 11 and Jaehaera's 6. So, like, they're married, but they're not really married, you know? It's just a formality at that age. And then there's Ned Bean, or Black Bean. I don't think much of him. He's obviously a shout out to Sean Bean, who played Ned Stark in the show. George R. R. Martin does that sometimes. There's even a character here whose name is obviously derived from William Shakespeare. His name is Willem Stackspear. And I really tried to find something that he has in common with William Shakespeare, but I couldn't find one. And it might just be because I don't know that much about William Shakespeare, but I don't think so. There's hardly any information about William Stackspear. Doesn't seem like there's enough. Alan Valerian goes out and conquers the Stepstones. A little too soon. And then they have to pay the Iron Bank a bunch of money. Her personality and character is exactly what I think of when I think of a woman from House Blackwood. She's like tall and slender, with long black curly hair. She smells like wood smoke, and she's kind of like tomboyish. She's an outdoorsy type, and she's kind of blunt. Blackwoods and Brackens. Everybody thinks the Blackwoods are obviously the good guys, and the Brackens are obviously the bad guys. But I'm pretty sure it's actually the other way around. I think the Brackens are probably the good guys, and the Blackwoods are the bad guys. And that the reason it seems like it's the opposite is because we haven't unraveled the history puzzles yet. And the reason we haven't done that yet is because we haven't accepted the fact that they're history puzzles. Most people don't know that they're history puzzles. It takes a toll on my faith in humanity. They're quite adamant about it, too. Like, if you try to tell anybody in this fandom that there's probably more going on beneath the surface than they know yet, a lot of people get downright belligerent about it. Like, no, that's definitely not true. You're wrong. You're just dead wrong. You're overthinking it. You're trying to be contrarian or trying to prove that you're smart, and you're just proving that you're stupid. And they're just flat out wrong. I forget who it was, but I was watching some from this little girl. She looked like she was 11 or something. And she was making the point that, like, George R. R. Martin wouldn't go to the trouble to make these books, in-story history books, written by in-story characters, if he weren't going to make them into history puzzles. And so they're obviously history puzzles. I was like, oh my god. This child is smarter than your average A Song of Ice and Fire reader. And I'm pretty sure your average A Song of Ice and Fire reader is like 28 or something. And she wasn't especially smart. I think the average Ice and Fire audience member, or maybe just the average Redditor, is wicked stupid. All young men suspect they are immortal, Grand Maester Monken writes in The True Telling. There you go right there. Grand Maester Monken is one of the historians. He wrote a history book, and the name of the history book is The True Telling of the Dance of the Dragons. You could hardly broadcast it more clearly. Like, look guys, it's not a coincidence that all of the good guys in history are the people who won. History's written by the winners, man. And what's funny about that phrase is that historians hate it. Well, some historians, I don't know about all, but I've seen plenty of historians bashing on that phrase and trying to, like, historian-splain to you that actually, no, you can't just treat history as though it's written by the victor. History's written by the person who wrote history. And when I hear that criticism of that phrase, I think to myself, well, yeah, but you're just taking the phrase too literally. Obviously, history's written by whoever wrote history. But the point of the phrase is to highlight that it's hard to write history when you're dead. As well as in the context of a war, whoever didn't die is obviously going to go and destroy the histories that their opponent wrote, and then rewrite them to their own specifications. It's the same way the word traitor works. Like, whoever loses the war is the traitors. And if the other side had won the war, the histories would call them the traitors. I think people in the story even say this, literally just directly say this. In Dunk and Egg, in The Sworn Sword, it's the second story. He has a monologue where he literally says this stuff. It's like, man, you got characters in the story telling you that history is written by the victor. You can't just take it at face value. Histories from hundreds of years ago are rewritten. Whenever there's a winner of a war that needs that part of history to be rewritten. Anyway, continuing. Okay, so Alan Valerian while he's in Dorne, he gets this mysterious meeting from Drazenko Rogar. He leans in close and he whispers that he's got a treasure for him. And then Alan Valerian shows up at King's Landing with the lost prince, Prince Viserys, and his family reunited. Prince Viserys and Aegon III hug, and Aegon has something to be happy about now. But there's a problem with succession. And I think the Hand, Lord Peake, he's right to be concerned about it. Succession is a big deal. If you don't patch up the line of succession as soon as you can, you're just inviting more civil wars. And you just had a big civil war. So yeah, everybody should be trying to prevent that again. That's the reason they wanted Aegon to get married. So that as soon as he's able, he can produce heirs. And then he went and chose a 6-year-old so that he wouldn't have to produce heirs. Just to spite his hand, I guess. I don't know why he did that. It made it so that Baela's baby was the heir. If it was a boy. But it came out a girl, so it was fine. But it was like an unnecessary risk. So I'm a little sympathetic towards the Hand there, but I'm curious why Aegon did that, though. Because that ball is so mysterious. His choice with that ball, where he was like, he just forgoes all of the women, and he chooses this little girl. And it's almost like they planned it, because Baela and Rhaena, they bring Daenerys in, like right at the end almost. And because it's at the end, Daenerys, she's not a hot, sweaty mess like everyone else. Because there's so many people in the throne room that, yeah, it's all hot and sweaty, and all their makeups are running, and they're smelly and whatnot. So, as pretty as they all were to start with, they're kind of like slovenly by the end of it. And the king's patience has run out, and he's just kind of like, he's done with it. He's done with his whole thing. And then his cousins bring Daenerys in together. And surprise, like them, she's a Valyrian. I think her being a Valyrian probably had something to do with it. I don't think he was just picking her based on looks or whatever, but I think maybe her age was part of it. Because he knew that if he marries a 6-year-old, he doesn't have to consummate the marriage. Because he can't. Well, she's too young. And he is too. But he's almost not too young. So when Viserys shows back up at King's Landing, he's got a wife with him. Lara Rogar. And I think she's 7 years older than him. And their ages are like she's 19 and he's 12. Something like that. And then 20 and 13. Lady Lara was with child. All of King's Landing rejoiced. There's another Joanna Lannister. I thought that was interesting. Her name's spelled differently than Tywin's wife, but it sounds the same. So George will often reuse names, but he doesn't often reuse first and last names at the same time. But he did for Joanna Lannister. And all he did was change up the spelling a little bit of her first name. And so, it makes the mirror more obvious and more certain, I think. I think the more obvious a mirror is, the more certain it is, you have to assume. And it's not so clear to me why he's mirroring Joanna Lannister here. In general, the why is that he's licensing a transport of information. As in some information about the present day Joanna can be borrowed and added to this past situation with Joanna to help us understand this past situation, or the other way around. There's some information in this historical Joanna that can be borrowed and applied to the present day Joanna situation to help us understand that one. But as to which piece of information that is, I don't know. No idea. But anyway, she really wants to kill the Ironborn. And no wonder. It's kind of hard to blame her. The Ironborn are such pests in this story. So Lara Rogar does not fit in King's Landing. And she doesn't want to either. She's just sticking to her Lyce culture, worshipping her strange gods, wearing Lycian clothes, and I'm not even trying to learn the Westerosi language, the common tongue. She's just continuing to speak her Lycian languages, and then having her translator translate everything. And so for everybody at court, it's got to be pretty insulting. You're going to marry our king and presume to be our queen, but you're not even going to learn our language? And you already know like 5 other languages, or however many it was. Once you know that many languages, you should be able to pick up the next one pretty easy. What's the big deal? So there's very much a snobbiness going on with Lara Rogar. As if she doesn't plan to stay here for long, or doesn't like this place or something, you know? And whatever it is, it's not good. It's not a good sign. So they're right to be suspicious of her, I think. So Lord Hand Peak was trying to get Aegon to marry his daughter so that his family can be the queen. And the way he went about it was actually really smart. Because he set up the ball, but he scheduled it for a long time later. I think it was weeks or months, which left him plenty of time to have his daughter spend some time and get to know the king. That is how long-lasting affection works, is that you have to know the person and become familiar with them, form attachments and all that. So Viserys' son, Aegon, is the heir. And that's kind of weird, because actually Viserys is the heir. Because the king's brother comes before the king's nephew. Sandok the Shadow. I don't know why the artist has him as a white man in the pictures, but in the story, his skin is solid black. It fits much better with his name. He's the Shadow, baby. He doesn't have any lips. His lips were cut off. So he wears this head covering. Like, when you're that freakish looking, you kind of got to, man. Just be thankful you live in a world where it's normal to wear helmets. If you're ugly today, you can't do that. You go around wearing a helmet, they're going to be thinking there's something wrong with you. And then there was the siege in Maegor's Holdfast. What was it, 18 days or something? Gaiman is killed, and then Lord Graceford comes up and confesses to everything. It's like, I did everything, it was me. And this is after he was tortured. And so all they really did was torture him until he was willing to just confess to everything, regardless whether he actually did it or not. It says, the confession left Aegon III bereft of speech. All that the boy could do was stand and stare, with such despair upon his face that Mushroom feared his grace might be about to leap from the battlements onto the spikes below, to rejoin his first queen. It fell to Prince Viserys to make answer. And my lady wife, Lady Lara, he shouted down. Was she a part of this plot too, my lord? Lord Rowan gave a heavy nod. She was, he said. And what of me? Asked the prince. Aye, you as well, his lordship answered dully. An answer that seemed to surprise Marston Waters, whilst greatly displeasing Lord George Graceford. Bam, there it is. And Gaiman Palehair, 'twas he who put the poison in the tart, I'll venture, Viserys went on glibly. If it please my prince, mumbled Thaddeus Rowan. Whereupon the prince turned to the king, his brother, and said, Gaiman was as guilty as the rest of us, of nothing. and the dwarf mushroom called down. "Lord Rowan, was it you who poisoned King Viserys?" To which the old hand nodded, saying, "It was, my lord. I do confess it." The king's face grew hard. "Sir Marston," he said, "this man is my hand and innocent of treason. The traitors here are those who tortured him to bring forth this false confession." So this really is the pinnacle of the whole mystery, the whole Regent drama Rogar mystery. Because the subtext in it is what contains the answers to it, sort of. It contains the information you need to contextualize everything that you just read for the last 100 pages or whatever. And so you basically have to go back and reread it, referencing the subtext in this passage to help you understand what's going on. I haven't done it yet, but one day I will. Like, once I got to it, I was like, oh my god. This is such a George ending. A George Martin ending, man. Because as I was reading it, I saw the telltale markers that this is a mystery. But I didn't know what to do with it. I thought whatever information I need to crack this, it's too subtle. I can't get at it. I need like a bigger hint. It wasn't until the end that I got it. And that was when I knew, well, it being at the end, I'm going to have to reread this whole thing. I'm not going to be able to just flip back to a page. When Lord Rowan says, "Ah, you as well," there's an ellipses, and then it says, "An answer that seemed to surprise Marston Waters, whilst greatly displeasing Lord George Graceford." And that's the line that gives away the whole game. Because the question is, why did it surprise Marston Waters? And if Viserys is not guilty, then surprise is the wrong reaction to what Rowan said. Marston Waters would not have been surprised by that. He would have been, like, baffled or confused or something. Like, that's weird. Why is he accusing somebody who is not even a suspect? It could also be that Rowan is, by accusing Viserys, he's giving away that his confessions are false. Because, obviously, Viserys could not be one of the guilty ones, because he's the brother of Aegon. But even if that's the explanation for Marston's reacting to it, Marston's reaction still doesn't make sense, because surprise is still the wrong reaction to that. The right reaction to that would have been anger or something. Like, damn it, I told you not to confess to anything more than I told you to confess to, because I don't want you to give away that they're false confessions. I need him to believe them. And so, the greatly displeasing Lord George Graceford part, his reaction actually makes more sense. It's Marston's that gives away the game. If the accusation is right and Viserys is guilty, then the second explanation must also be true. In that case, implicating Viserys would be displeasing for Graceford for both reasons. That it implicates Graceford's accomplice, and that it confesses to more than he was told to confess to. And of course, the first one of those is the more significant of the two causes of Graceford's displeasure. It's also Viserys being the one to speak up that implicates Viserys. Because he's trying to play Aegon's love of Gaiman for his innocence. After Rowan implicates Gaiman Palehair, Viserys knows that Gaiman Palehair and Aegon are like best friends. And that Aegon is going to be devastated to hear that Gaiman Palehair was betraying him. So when Viserys chooses Gaiman Palehair to use as his example of these are false confessions, he's sneakily placing himself in a group with Gaiman Palehair, where the group is people who are being falsely accused by Rowan. So when Viserys says that Gaiman Palehair is as guilty as the rest of us of nothing, he's relying upon Aegon's love for Gaiman Palehair and his desire to not believe that he was betrayed by him, to cause Aegon to also not believe that Viserys betrayed him. It's very sneaky. Yeah, whenever a person suffers a betrayal that serious, like from a family member or an old friend, there's a really strong motivation to not believe it. And so all you have to do is just offer a reason not to believe it. And they'll be happy to believe it. And in this case, that motivation would be doubly strong because it's not just his best friend, it's also his brother. It's his two closest friends, basically. So the 13-year-old Viserys was the evil mastermind behind it all. I'm pretty sure. He was trying to get Aegon, his brother, and her queen killed so that he could be king. And I have little doubt that Lara Rogar was encouraging him to do it. It might have even been her idea. We're also told that the Lysene are the sorts of people who they do not give a crap about honor. All they care about is money. And Aegon was basically brought up in Lys. Because he was kidnapped when he was like 9 or something, right? Now he's 13. So he spent the 4 most formative years of his life in Lys. And that's going to rub off on you. There's a line somewhere close to the end that actually says that the Lyseni are more forgiving of avarice than dishonor, or something like that. And avarice means greed. Then he would just not be so concerned with betraying his brother and family for greed for the throne. And there's another line somewhere in here that says that Aegon trusted his brother completely in everything. And that he felt guilty about leaving him. This interplay of like trust and guilt, where you've got your guilt about abandoning your little brother is like the fuel for the trust. He feels like he's got to trust him more to make up for his guilt. And so he just trusts him too much. And it blinds him to the possibility that his brother is the one who's behind the attempted murders of himself and his wife and all that. So many of A Song of Ice and Fire's mysteries rely upon the reader to overlook the politics of the setting. To downplay how important succession is, that's probably the biggest one. Like just how evil people are willing to be. Like if a casual reader just read this story for the first time, and then you suggested to them the possibility that Viserys was the evil mastermind behind it all, the knee-jerk reaction is going to be, no, that's nonsense. Viserys was Aegon's brother. They loved each other. And then you might say to them something like, well, yeah, but he was also in line to inherit the throne after Aegon. So don't you think Viserys has a strong motivation to get Aegon killed? And then they would probably just repeat what they said the first time. No, Viserys is Aegon's brother. They love each other. They trust each other in everything. Anyway, those are some of my first thoughts about the ending of Fire and Blood. Aegon III. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you got something out of it. And I'll see you next time.